Old Blake and the Liberator set course for Saurian Major, where they encounter a strange telepathic girl called Callie. Right now, we've the first of two special programmes as the cast look back on the series.
Blake was either a rebel or, I don't know, a saviour figure, one of the two. I decided to make him a rebel because I think there's more sympathy, or at least there was in those days, more sympathy with a rebel than someone who's just a do-gooder, a knight in shining armour. And so I decided to try and make him as real as possible. As a character to play on television, I quite liked doing Blake. I quite liked him, I quite liked what he stood for, I quite liked his ideas. I couldn't actually condone everything he did. Blake, if he believed in something, he became a fanatic, and he would override anybody. Blake was never a real hero because I didn't think it was good and evil. We were presented as being good, but we did one or two fairly nefarious acts, shall we say. Mainly on screen.
And just who are you?
Well, according to the Federation, I'm a political criminal. You may have heard of me. My name is Blake.
Blake was so wrapped up in his, ambition's the wrong word, but in his drive. He could tend to be, on occasions, very insensitive. There has been talk, I've often been asked, was there anything between Blake and Jenna? The answer is very simple, no. Although there was never anything over and above two crew members, I think he possibly had a very slightly soft spot for Jenna. Had Blake been a complete human, he may well have had some affection for Jenna.
If K-47 hit the center of a meteor storm, why will it suddenly reappear thousands of light years away?
So what's your theory?
I'm not launching any theories till I've tested the water. I'm going to teleport down.
What about Avon and Villa?
Well, they've got enough to do.
Yes, but what about Federation security?
What if the first sign of trouble, I'll come back up?
Look, Blake, they know all about the teleport system. The first time they get your bracelet...
Jenna, I have been down before.
On screen, yes, there were conflicts, obviously, between Blake and Avon. It's interesting that the Federation as such, particularly with the head of the Federation, Servalan, she at one point recognized Avon almost as an equal. And I think Avon almost recognized her as an equal. The one person she could never beat was Blake. Now, whether that puts him above the others, or whether he's fighting from such a strong moral standpoint, as opposed to a personal one, I don't know.
Did I think Blake was boring? I thought he was much more copable with than Avon. He didn't have the element of danger for me that Avon did. But I don't think he was intended to.
Servalan was a symbolic figure, and that had to be destroyed.
All I want to do is finish what I started. I'm going to take Avalon out of here.
I don't think so.
That would not be very clever.
You wouldn't do it.
What have I got to lose?
It's not a pleasant death, Blake.
So I gather. But it would have its compensations. I'd share it with you. And the Supreme Commander. Are you quite sure I wouldn't do it?
Bring the prisoner in.
Blake was deeply affected by the death of Gan.
With the bland approach that Gan had to have towards most things, he looked upon Blake as the leader, almost in a brotherly way, I felt.
When it came down to the final episode, I was asked back, and I said I would come back on one condition, and that was that I was seen to be killed.
Have you betrayed me? Talon doesn't understand.
Neither do I.
I set all this up.
Yes.
Avon, I was waiting for you.
Blake was not corrupt. He was also never corrupted. He believed in something, he believed in it very firmly, and as such was a very useful figurehead for British television to have at that particular time. We'd started off with such a strong conflict between the Federation and Blake 7 that to diversify any of that, I think, would have actually taken the series away anyway. It would have ceased to be Blake 7. It would have just been 7 people wandering around in space.
In a moment, the crew of the Liberator set course for Saurian Major in Blake 7. But first, we've the second part of our look back on that legendary series.
I think Servalan's motivation, the thing that drove her, was a need for power because she wanted to make herself invulnerable. Because I think essentially she was a very vulnerable person. And like people who are that vulnerable, she had an extraordinary display of strength. I do think that Avon and Servalan were well matched as a couple. Yes, there was a sexual tension, which should have been developed much more. I think that was probably, certainly for me to play, the most interesting part of the show. I think relationships are what is important, and I found episodes of standing there saying standard by 10 profoundly boring. You and I could build an empire greater and more powerful than the Federation ever was or ever could have been. Now, Avon, at this moment we can take history and shape it in our own image. Think of it. Absolute power. Servalan occupied a position of power, great power, at a time when women weren't doing that nearly as much. And I think that was part of her fascination.
In the series, Servalan was very much a token man. There are comparisons which we could make.
The interesting thing for me when Terry Nation was writing the script, he told me that originally Servalan was a man. And he was halfway through the first episode when he suddenly thought, no, he's a she. So halfway through writing, she became a woman. I found that very interesting. I think you should know that there's been considerable criticism of your handling of the Blake affair.
What?
Well, so far, your operation has been very costly, and there have been no worthwhile results.
That's not entirely just. There have been 2 occasions where I could have destroyed Blake. It was only the administration's insistence that the Liberator be captured undamaged that stopped me.
I have made that point in your defense, but I can't go on making excuses.
Blake's attitude to Servalan was that as the head of the arch enemy, she was the one driving force that had to be destroyed.
I felt when I was doing Blake 7 and playing Servalan that I didn't get the support of the people around me to the degree that I felt I should have done. I don't know if it was because it was a them and us situation on the screen and therefore it developed into that off screen. But I felt very much that I was on my own against everybody else, or that everybody else was against me. I think people, certainly in the cast, approached her with caution, particularly as the series developed. And I don't know, did the audience have a fear of her? I think she generated a certain respect.
I think Callie thought Servalan was a total pain. I don't think she had any respect for Servalan at all. Only respect in the sense that Servalan was in a position of great power and could possibly one day get the better of the Liberator and her crew.
I was playing Servalan, Supreme Commander of the Universe, so the producer said I should wear a safari suit and jack boots and a helmet. And at that time, as you know, I had very short hair. So I said, well, if you do that with this haircut, you might as well cast a man. I think we should go completely in the opposite direction and play against the slightly masculine look and dress her in a very feminine way. Oh, very attractive. A little old-fashioned and not my color, but it'll do very nicely.
Not too young for you?
Oh, I don't think so, do you? I find unsophisticated clothes quite amusing. Like unsophisticated people. Obvious, but amusing. I think that was always a moot point. Where had Servalan come from? No, I didn't have any idea of her history. I don't work that way. My favorite episode of Blake 7 is an episode called Sand, written by Tanith Lee. And the reason I find it so interesting is because she was wise enough to show the vulnerability of the woman, to show why she had developed this obsessive lust for power, which for her equaled protection against a world she found extremely harsh.
He left me. I grew up. Power became my lover. Power is like a drug. It is beautiful, shining. I could destroy a planet by pressing a button.
This man wrote to Servalan and said, would I go around and chastise him? But could I go after 10 o'clock at night because his mother didn't go to bed till 9:30? Do I think I would inspire a new generation with sexual fantasies? I certainly hope so. What do I think captured the imagination of the viewers when it was first shown? Me, darling. I've always maintained that.